So, what would you say is the one thing that execs are currently missing when it comes to their cyber health?
I think for us, our experience has shown us that like most people don't know where to start. I think it can be a very overwhelming conversation. I think most people would acknowledge there's improvement to be made, but I think you kind of have this like get off zero problem, and I think people are a little bit overwhelmed by just the sheer magnitude of like the surface area of the problem. And I think for us, I think that that was really kind of like where we wanted to start was how do we make it approachable? How do we make it like easy for people just to like get going?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the C-Suite Cyber Podcast. The C-Suite Cyber Podcast enables C-Suite executives to make security-informed decisions. Today, we're joined with Mr. Jeremey Banon. So we're going to talk about some interesting stuff related to cyber health. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So what would you say is the one thing that execs are currently missing when it comes to their cyber health?
I think for us, our experience has shown us that like most people don't know where to start. I think it can be a very overwhelming conversation. I think most people would acknowledge there's improvement to be made, but I think you kind of have this like get off zero problem. Um, and I think people are a little bit overwhelmed by just the sheer magnitude of like the surface area of the problem. Um, And I think for us, I think that that was really kind of like where we wanted to start was how do we make it approachable? How do we make it like easy for people just to like get going?
Nice. And how would you equate, I guess, cybersecurity to healthcare, right? Because that's kind of your whole area.
Yeah. Yeah. I think traditionally the marketing tone that has worked really well with security products at large is a combination of fear and information asymmetry. Like by that, I mean your traditional TV ads that might say, there's a hack every 30 seconds and you can be next unless you pay us $8 a month for, whatever monitoring. And I think like that uh, formula has worked for a really long time for a certain percentage of the population. I think in our experience, we found that the vast majority of people do not spend in the category and kind of take product security, think iPhone or Uber or American Express as like they do their job and I'm good just because they spend. But I think the more mature audience, right, certainly the more technical folks that we speak to who have an awareness that, those companies that sell in that way are a little bit hollow, are looking for a more mature conversation, are looking for a more mature solution that's going to treat them like an adult and say, hey, if you don't work with us, you are not going to be compromised tomorrow. But as a smart person who is aware of like the risks that are changing, um, we agree that it's advisable to get support on sort of taking those first steps to minimize risk. I think in that way, it's a lot like healthcare. It is not that if you don't work with this longevity doctor or go to the trainer or see that specialist that you're going to experience an acute pain tomorrow. But I do think it's about making sensible choices and understanding the trade-offs that are actually achievable by the individual to make great security and privacy adjusted decisions. I think in that way, it's a lot like the sort of proactive healthcare conversation that's happening right now in our country. And for us, we think it's a much more mature way to approach the problem for the vast majority of people who are not currently spending in the space.
Mike, I'm curious, what are your thoughts there?
No, I mean, that's kind of our take when we talk about cybersecurity with folks. Is we don't want to fear monger, right? That's the thing in its own right, but that's not the answer to the problem. The answer to the problem is usually probably a lot of what you talk to your customers, a lot of small things that add up, kind of like healthcare, right? Just because they're eating cheeseburgers at
Correct.
a grocery store every day, you're not going to have a heart attack tomorrow or the next week or the next year, but it adds up, and it
Correct.
is what it is. Yeah,
Yeah, and
that makes sense.
the incentives, right, like are also related. Like McDonald's and Marlboro, right? Like they employ doctors for a very long time to tell you that their products are healthy and safe to eat every day. And if you talk to them, they will justify it. But at the end of the day, like I think most people realize that the authority that's going to give them the best advice for themselves is not someone who's incentivized to sell more of that product. And for us, we think that's I think very foundational is that you want an advocate, right? You want someone who thinks about, AJ or Mike, like what is good for that person, not what is good for the product. And again, as our most important assets increasingly digitize, like we think that sort of the current equilibrium is very, very unsustainable. And there'll be a lot of different solutions at very, very different price points for people to get like a direct model. Um, but again, I think for us, like it's very, very clear that people do need help in this regard, and it's actually quite hard to come by.
Do you find yourself having to do a lot of education with clients, or are they already coming in pretty educated and you're just kind of helping them along a little bit further?
Yeah, I mean, it's like there is like a marketing adage that you should like preach to the already converted. So I think it's always easy when we are talking to people who don't have to be convinced that like the doing nothing is okay. Um, that said, there of course your privacy or security skeptics that are not sold on the fact that they should be doing something, or what they have today, the status quo, is not good enough. Um, I would say in that sense, like we take it as somewhat of an honor to educate people in this category to, again, without fear, in a mature and honest way, say, here are the risks, here's what's happening. Um, and there are some sensible frictions you can endure in your day-to-day life to make sure those things are extremely unlikely.
What are your typical customers?
Today, we work mostly with higher risk individuals. So these are either executives at large companies, certainly public companies have a particular interest in our work. But also we work with high net worth individuals that just quite frankly have a lot to lose and are therefore like very rational targets for attackers. Um, I think in the corporate example, like we really think about the CISO as like our key champion, where they are probably very technical and able to protect themselves in a pretty reasonable way, but they're like some ways constrained at how much they can do for their executive team on the personal side. Um, and then typically on the high net worth side, like people have an appreciation that cyber is an increasing risk. These are people who are either running companies themselves or in boardrooms, and they're hearing sort of more and more about their companies and businesses they're affiliated with that are doing more. Um, and they're asking themselves the question like, why am I immune from this? Why am I not doing more? Um, and so I think for us, like those are probably the people that are most interesting for us to be working with. I think the other reason why we chose this category to start with is because they're facing the most advanced threats first, right? Like before a threat can become economical to deliver and like call it the mass market, it's typically tested at like a higher net worth level. And so for us, there's an advantage as far as like, okay, where does the market clear today from a demand perspective? But also we want to be looking at the threats that like are going to be facing hundreds of millions of people tomorrow. And like this population is like fairly ideal for that.
I have a question to go
Yeah.
down into this a little bit. So, do you take into account their family members as well? And I ask that because we used to, when I did pen testing back in the day, at a big company, we did what's called a PIP, so public information profiling. And we found that a lot of the information we got was actually from their spouse or their kids and stuff like that. So, are they taken into consideration as
Yeah.
well as part of this?
Yeah, the short answer is absolutely. So, similar to a new doctor, there are two inputs into an initial assessment for how we perform like a threat modeling exercise as an individual. The first is a questionnaire, so they'll voluntarily answer security and privacy questions that help us understand where they're at. These could be things like, how do you come up with a new password, or do you have a guest Wi-Fi network at home? But your question really concerns the second input, which is we conduct an open source intelligence investigation on each executive or each individual member that we work with. That definitely includes all available open source material, which includes social media family members. we will often see a wide variety of attitudes towards the voluntary upload of content online from young people, old people, and in between. And it's not to say that young people are worse or old people are worse or people in the middle are the worst. I have seen at every age people have irresponsible or more sort of open attitudes towards publishing information about themselves online. In fact, we do ask the question during our intake, are you trying to promote yourself online in order to increase your followers? And today we probably get about 11 or 12% of our respondents say I am. But for most people that we work with, they are actually trying to not just increase security, but also increase privacy. Um, as far as the remediation work going forward, we of course allow our members to include family members, executive assistants, chiefs of staff, anybody who's in your trusted circle who has privileged access is a totally viable target in order to get to the ultimate executive. So um, the short answer is in an assessment, absolutely it's included. As far as the remediation work, right, like how we work with them on an ongoing basis, it's really up to them over how deep they want it. We certainly recommend it. And I would say we work with people of all ages.
I think that's really important that you include EAs or executive assistants and family, because that's something that I didn't even think of. But there's some individuals will give essentially their entire life over to
Right.
their EA, and they might not be as well versed in security. So that's probably an area that is very fruitful for attackers.
Yeah. I mean, I would say for our audience, it's more common than not that there is someone who they are outsourcing or delegating to a very consistent amount of their work. I'll also add that I think these people who are support, by and large, want to help. Like they want to be helpful in this regard, but there is also like a practical kind of uh, implication where, for example, if you're throwing multi-factor on things with no regard for that there might be multiple people that need to access that account, like you're just encouraging people to like step outside the compliance of like whatever you're investing in. So I think for us, like part of it on the OSINT side is how do we simulate what a type of prospecting exercise an attacker would do to find the most economical way to compromise the target. But sort of on the back end of that, it's like, well, if you're creating a system that is not going to have buy-in, then they're just going to abandon it. So it's not practical. Um, and I think again that takes a lot of different unexpected shape sizes for different people. And I think for us, one of the benefits of being sort of the audience we are is that we can accommodate those types of like custom like additions.
Nice. And you had mentioned earlier being an advocate for the individuals. So, how did you get into this space? What made you pursue this?
It is a sad story that we're hopefully trying to turn into a happy ending. I was personally compromised about 10 years ago. Um, and I think in a lot of ways, this is the company I wish existed in that time. I didn't start the company like right away. Like it was actually quite a few years in between before it became clear that like this is what I wanted to do. But yeah, I think just in the wake of that attack, I realized kind of three very, very critical things. Like number one, I was outsourcing a tremendous amount of security and privacy to companies I did not think were security and privacy companies, like cell phone carriers or Google I mean, they were incredibly important in my defense, and it just like had never crossed my mind. Um, the second thing is that their defaults were incredibly not in my best interest from a security and privacy perspective. And we have like a little kitschy phrase about it now, the devil's in the defaults. And there's an incentive for them to have less security, less privacy for a lot of reasons. And then the third was that when I needed support, it was not only possible to get a hold of a human, but even once I could, they were unable to coordinate, right? The attackers moved very efficiently, right, out of one product and into another. And at that point, like support was essentially useless. Um, and so I think in a lot of ways, I wish I had been better prepared to handle that. And a company like the one that exists today would have been an ideal partner for me. Um, and then certainly on the reactive support side, like had I had a trusted resource, someone I could have been in touch with who could have first let me know that I had a problem, what was the extent of it, what to do next to stop the bleeding.
Do you work with people who have recently been compromised as well, or is it strictly beforehand?
The the strong preference is to work with people ahead of a problem. I would say the time pressure that can come with an active incident is like a very, very different type of experience. I think part of like the difference in our communication and our framing of this problem like healthcare is we want to be a primary care physician, not an ER, right? Like we will do it. But it's very, very challenging work. I have a ton of respect for people who do like incident response like all the time. It's very stressful for everyone involved. We will do it, but it's rare. I also think that when you come from an incident response starting point, you tend to have the wrong attitude about what cybersecurity is. You tend to think of it more like I'm having a heart attack, like get me out of this situation, more so that it's something to actually be continuously investing in. That is more of a, it's like a trainer. It's you don't go to the gym and it's over, right? It's something you have to stay up with just because your body's changing. Yeah, the short answer is we do it on sort of rare occasions, but our strong preference is to be working with people without the pressure of an active incident.
So, okay, you work with both individuals, although you highly prefer to be before the incident. How do you actually help these individuals, like, kind of understand where their risk is? Maybe some paths that could be taken. Like, how do you bring light to this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I know. I mean, we mentioned this in part before, but I think it starts from quantification. Like, you can't improve something unless you're measuring it. So for us, it's like every person is in a little way like different, and for us, it's incumbent to understand who they are before we start making recommendations. As far as how we measure them, we have two inputs to our initial assessment. Number one is we do an intake questionnaire. We will allow them to voluntarily respond to questions that help us assess their posture today. And in parallel, we'll conduct an open source intelligence investigation where one of our analysts will do a survey of them online, looking into, as Mike asked before, social media profiles of them and their family. These could be press clippings, interviews they've given, nonprofits they're involved with, property records, voting records, LLCs they've created. Of course, we'll look into more darker sources as well, like breach data and such, to find any existing exposures that they might have. By bringing those two things together, both the voluntary response and the outside looking in perspective, we're able to give like a pretty holistic picture of where we think their biggest risks sit today. As far as how we help, like with the threats in mind, we assign a personalized, what we call a care plan, right, to really sort of hammer home our healthcare parallels here, which is a mixture of software, professional implementations, monitoring that we want to set up for that individual to mitigate the risks that we're most concerned about. Similar to a doctor, there are, of course, recommendations that are extremely consistent person to person in the same way a doctor would say, better diet, more exercise, less, smoking. There are, of course, the same corollaries in our work. Multi-factor is your friend. When you get a call from an unknown number, don't answer it, right? Like these are clearly wholesale recommendations that apply, that everyone can learn from. But I think for us, we try and give each of our members the best return on their time in terms of risk reduction. That involves some specialized program that can be custom fit for them, given, again, both inputs as well as requests they have. Like we have people who come to us and say, hey, I have an email account that's an AOL account that I can't get into, and it's actually linked to my iCloud. And I'll say, well, it's probably not my biggest concern, but if it's important for you, then let's figure it out, right? And so I think in that sense, we also want to make sure that they're getting what they want. And a lot of people will come to us with some sort of like a to-do list of things that they've been unable to tackle, and we try our best to apply our expertise to help them achieve it. I think in that sense, like we try and make for each person the a program that again works for them and going to give them the best risk reduction.
I think it's pretty interesting that you mentioned the time investment required to take the steps. That's a really good idea and a really good approach, I think, because certain things do take quite a bit more time than others. What kind of goes into that? How do you identify which is more critical versus the time investment there? How do you make that judgment call for your clients?
I mean, I think for us, there has to be a reasonable expectation of how much time is available from an individual, right? Like, I mean, we have like general sense of what a busy executive and what a busy person looks like. And to say that we're going to meet with them weekly is a joke, right? Like in the same way that CISOs struggle to do annual or quarterly this and that. I mean, we face the same restrictions where, there is a difference between urgent and important, and it's hard for people to distinguish between those two. I would say we prefer to be in the important, not urgent category. Obviously, we're available when needed. Um, but I think for us, it's really driven by the threat. Like, what is the threat that would be most devastating to that person, given both likelihood and impact? So a great example is if you're running your entire life through Apple, like I need to make sure that that Apple account is secure, which might be different from someone who's more distributed across other big tech companies, whether it be your, sort of Google's, Facebook's, et cetera. Um, but I think for us, it has to be customized to that person. Granted, we know there are some workloads that are quite frankly chunkier than others, and they again have their calendars have to be respected. Like, I think either the CEO or the chief product officer of Duolingo has this like great idea about like what's more important, like engagement or improvement, like from like a language perspective. And he's like, without the engagement, the second one doesn't matter, right? So if you're giving people stuff, it's not approachable, it takes too much time, it's too difficult for them, like.
Yeah, I mean that's very true. That friction is a big thing, and if they're not engaged, there's a lot more friction to the problem.
Yeah, you can't take it. Like I think like a lot of security companies struggle to like, as opposed to other products, in that like there is not like a habitual for a non-professional user, which our core user is the individual at the end of the day. Even though we sell in most cases to security teams for their executives, like our user is the executive. They're not coming back to our dashboard or our products every day, right? I think that's not like that. That's not what they want. I think if we can position it again more like a trainer or something like that, or a dentist, where there is some amount that is periodic that will manage risk and keep you ahead of problems, like that's the right cadence. And I think, it's hard, even for some of our employees, they might take it personally if someone cancels last minute or something like that. And you just have to understand that they're here proactively, and that is much, much better than it being an emergency.
Yeah.
So sorry, this thought just popped into my head.
Yeah.
So do you act as like the hospital, and then you have multiple doctors that like see your patients, which would be your clients? Is
Yeah.
that
I
kind
mean,
of like the structure?
I would think about it like there is an entire team here who is capable of doing a lot of different things. There are certain sort of individuals who are more qualified in certain categories than others. And you can even think of like something like Windows versus Mac as being like a good example. Like if we have someone who's on a Windows machine, like I would prefer someone versus somebody else who might be more proficient in that. But it doesn't mean they couldn't do it the other way. But of course, we have people who have like expertise and stuff like that. I would say as far as the support is concerned, like we very much think of it as like an all hands on deck approach. So I wouldn't say it's like you're assigned to a person, that's your person. Um, uh, I think we have like the infrastructure in place whereby whoever you are speaking to can very efficiently know what they need to know to help you. What type of machine you have. Are you a social media star with 1 million followers, an executive who's trying to be private? Um, I think those relevant factors like have to be at the fingertips to get like great, point in time support.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with the rise of like AI and deep fakes,
Yeah.
have you had to change some of your processes with more people being easily faked through deep fakes? I mean, I think it takes like 1 minute of video now to
Yeah.
create like a pretty viable impersonation.
Yeah. I mean, we were always a fan of minimizing your digital footprint. In fact, perhaps doing this podcast goes against my better judgment. Um, uh, but yeah, I mean, like honestly, like personally, there's like a struggle between like trying to like be sort of like living your values and not putting out content, but also like wanting to sort of, bring more attention to this problem. I think it starts with great privacy, right? Like, do not be putting content up unnecessarily if there's no value. Now, if you're a business leader and you have to go to a conference or do an earnings call, right? Like, what am I going to tell you? Don't do an earnings call because it marginally increases your personal cyber risk. Like, no, that goes back to us knowing who the individual is, managing risks that are, reasonable. I would also say that we have had to do more education around, maybe to Mike's earlier question about family members. That is a super, super common attack you're seeing where a phone number is spoofed and someone calls and says, I'm in trouble, I need help. And it sounds like them, and they're referencing real information that they've pulled using OSINT. Um, so I would say for us, it's become more of a focus. I still don't think like crack's probably the top 10, like, sort of most common and impactful cyber threats we're seeing, but it's certainly one of the fastest growing. There's no question.
I have a question before we get too far away. You
Yeah.
mentioned you're talking about how you prefer like some people are on multiple types of technology or ecosystems. And
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had a preference for people to be spread out across ecosystems or to be on
Yeah.
a single ecosystem.
It's a great question. The security principle that applies is like too many eggs in one basket is not a good thing. And so I think for us, like the distribution is really important. Um, I think the example we commonly see is where like the major tech platforms try and own passwords. I think like that's kind of like the prime example we like do try and encourage against, whereby say it's Google and they've done such a great job of integrating into Chrome over all these years. If your Gmail account is compromised, you really want to give them like the janitor key ring for the rest of your life. You would already be in a world of trouble. Okay. And I think for us, we think about how to make attackers' lives difficult, and certainly that would necessitate some separation. Now, again, I think going back to knowing your audience, there are some people who are resistant to it and they're kind of happy with the way things are. For us, it's helping them make great privacy and security adjusted decisions while educating them about these sorts of risks. I would say like my blanket statement though is I would prefer you not be like overly locked into a single ecosystem. And it doesn't matter. Like I think those companies are incredibly sophisticated from a security standpoint. But again, I would the same way like a money manager, I think would recommend you keep checking accounts and brokerage accounts kind of spread out at different institutions. For us, it's the exact same principle.
Are there certain things that you require of your customers? So, for example,
Yeah, it's a good question.
when I think of like the biggest bang for your buck, right? It's email because
Yeah.
everything is tied to your email. So, do
Yeah.
you require MFA for email or any particular processes that you have?
I would say that we have never gotten to a point with someone who we were working with that we felt that they were not playing ball enough and that they were too risky. I think the more common is like lack of cooperation as far as like making time for it. And like we definitely see some bad habits that we know exist, like linger for a while, but never like outright refusal. Like we don't again, like I wouldn't say we've ever like quote unquote fired a customer for that reason. I think it just filters, right? Like you're not gonna sort of sign up for this type of partnership, right? Which is how we think about it in a lot of ways. Super high trust, like we're here to help you. We maintain a super high integrity relationship with vendors. Like we don't take payments from companies to promote products. We want to give you what's best with cyber health first in mind. So number one value. Um, I think it'll eventually happen where someone's doing it because they want an emergency line to call, and then they'll sit down. They won't do anything, make any changes. We'll see them posting content that's, you know, very, very revealing. We'll send alert after alert after alert that we don't, this is increasing the risk for X, Y, and Z reasons. But I wouldn't say I feel that's our job to like be the parent.
Do you have like um, some kind of monitoring software? Like
Yeah.
you can dodge this question if you need to. But I was just thinking like, are you having to constantly query and do like OSINT or open source intelligence gathering, or like do you have an agent on their phone or on their laptop or whatever to kind of like proactively identify these issues to you?
I mean, maybe you want to cut this just because it might not like answer your question like directly, but I would differentiate between OSINT and on-device, right?
Yeah.
So we are doing continuous OSINT. There is certainly a human being who's very intimately involved in the initial assessment, right? It's of course like software agent, okay, and you're using a lot of different databases to consolidate information. And that said, we are continuously scouring the open internet for new mentions of people's names, right? New mentions of their PII. So, for example, we work with public companies where executives are in earnings reports, right? Like we're of course going to automatically pick those up um, and feed those into our monitor for them. They actually can access all the different mentions our system picks up. Like we have a live monitor where they can see all of those things. Some of those things carry no marginal risk. For example, if the CEO of Bank X is in an earnings call that company is he's still the CEO of Bank X, we'll pick up the monitor, right? We'll flag the mention, but we're not going to send an alert about that, right? Like that's that, I wouldn't think that's a very good threshold for alerting. But critically, we do respect privacy of our members. We do not install software on like their home network and such to alert them of certain things. I think there are companies that will do that for us. I actually don't think that's what people want. I think there's a lot of responsibility that would come with a model like that. That's probably more appropriate for the enterprise. I think for us, like we prefer the sort of the more of the opt-in type of things where we want to stack the deck in your favor. We want to set up monitoring that doesn't increase the risk. But I think the type of relationship that you're talking about for us was a bridge too far. And in the design of all of our products, they really keep that sort of privacy by default.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. When you were talking, I was just trying to imagine like how much data you're having to sift through, right?
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
a lot. It's a lot. And especially for people who are in the media a lot. Like they
yeah.
can generate hundreds of unique mentions per month. Hundreds. And it is a lot. I think there's a balance between, being thorough and being, I think, smart about what you're spending analysts' time on to actually dig into the details with a human being beyond, what's what's possible from an automated standpoint today. I think again, like to mimic what attackers are doing, how we think about things from a threat perspective. I think that's how they think about it. They are using automation and AI to automate certain core functions of their business, including prospecting, right? Including intelligence gathering, including, signal recognition, et cetera. We think we should be doing the same thing. Um, it's not to say that we're a pen testing firm or anything like that. Like you're not engaging in that type of like active measures. But at the same time, we do view it as our core responsibility to make sure our members have the capacity to be as aware of their attack surface as an attacker. And for us, that can be like a very, very immense problem for an individual to stay on top of every single thing that's about them. So we sort of take that as our responsibility to consolidate it, alert when necessary. We actually issue reports every month.
Are y'all monitoring breaches and stuff for your clients as well?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure. I think that's another thing that again, like going back to the healthcare stuff and talking about more the problem that kind of CISOs face is that when their executives are in breaches, they will often get these kind of like vanilla legalese letters from these companies. And it doesn't really tell them what the problem is, right? Like it doesn't really tell them what to do. I think for us, we view communication as a core competency for what we do, which is how do you distill a somewhat complicated event into very, very simple sections, and our data breach alerts are the exact same format. What happened? What data was exposed? What should you do next? Those are the only three things that, right? You give them a brief synopsis of what happened. They don't probably care about the technical details, exactly what of their information was detected, and like here's exactly what you need to do next. Sometimes there's a explicit thing to change. Other times it's you should be alert to a certain piece of information that's now been exposed that wasn't previously exposed, and it can be used against you in social engineering or, it's a key, call it security question on the bank or something like that. Like for us, like it's very important for people to be aware of what's public and what's private.
So I have a fun question for you. So this
Yeah.
typically comes up a lot in information security circles, cybersecurity space. How do you feel about the social security number as like a sensitive item for folks? What are your thoughts there?
Question.
Probably not that controversial. My view is like from our customer's perspective, in our OSINT report, we find it 100% of the time. And so my assumption is that attackers can find it 100% of the time. Now, the question is, what does that mean? Number one, I don't think you should be giving it out. Okay, so there's no need to make the problem worse. That said, I do think that any institution that uses it for verification is not doing their job in 2026. It's public, right? Like it's a public domain question, and I think that like we advise people to select vendors that do not rely on poor methods of authentication, and I think that there are many industries that are still pretending that that is a good way to distinguish the real person from not, and I think they're living in Stone Ages. Uh, Truly, I think they're living in Stone Ages.
So well, I guess two parts here, because I think this is a fun topic for folks
Yeah.
in general. So what have you seen out there that is a better source for verification? And if you haven't seen a good one, what are your thoughts on an improvement in that space to help validate we are indeed humans and US citizens?
No, I mean, I don't know if like I'm qualified to weigh in on like the proof of humanity, like AI debate, if that's what you're getting at. But like, I do think that, I mean, we have great multi-factor today. I think there's issues on adoption. Um, but like, I don't think a social security number is a good way to differentiate. I'd rather, again, I don't love SMS multi-factor, but that is better, in my opinion. It at least makes an attacker work for it, right? Like the social security number is free. Like it's not, I just I am of the opinion that it should be rooted out as a, not to say that we shouldn't have a social security number to identify for whatever, as a, call it a UUID for our government services, right? Like I think that's fine, but to say that it's this safely guarded number, I think is insane in 2026. I don't know. I don't know. I think there are a lot of smart people who are probably thinking about that problem. For me, it's just reflect the reality, which is, and we ask this question, by the way, when we do like a financial hardening module. It's like, let's try and change the password on your bank account and let's see what they put you through. And if it's not that difficult for you to change it, then it's not that difficult for someone who wants to hurt you to change it. And so maybe we should consider a different institution, or can we ask about moving to a different bracket within the institution to make sure there's wire verification, right? Has to have a phone call, right? Again, anything that's a little bit challenging for an attacker is better than the status quo. And again, I think social security number is just it's nothing.
I know Mike is in the same boat, but I appreciate that as someone who was in the military and had all of our information stolen from one of the
And
three-letter
OPM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But while you were speaking, I was thinking of something, and I'm curious to get your take. So, I'm curious if, obviously voice is out, right? Just because of the technology today, it's very easy to clone. Maybe there's some some digital signatures that you could pick up, but I'm curious if in the future you will put your fingerprint on your camera, and like it'll be able to read your fingerprint, and that will be used as a source of verification, because that's like something that's always on you, right? So going to like two-factor. No, okay, Mike's saying no, so let's.
I don't know. I again, like I don't know that we're thinking about like being like, I don't know, whatever, pick your authentication provider, right? Like 2.0. I don't have like the strongest opinion on what the right. I do think though that like clearly the biometric stuff is like a rat race. People are trying to, you know, build it and then copy it and so on and so forth. And I think cyber is the same way, right? Like we'll fight this battle between uh, attackers and defenders for the next 1,000 years. And, I don't know what the right form factor is that's going to be resistant for hundreds of years. I don't know. It brings up some existential questions about like what makes us uniquely human and uniquely us. I tend to think a little bit more like today, like what are the risks people face today? And I would say, like Face ID, for example, I think is like mostly good. There are certain sort of implementation questions that we're very specific on of who should have access to Face ID, et cetera. But like by and large, I think that stuff is for certainly for most people is very acceptable.
Yeah, so to speak to the fingerprint thing, did you not see the news article like maybe 5 years ago? It was the German Prime Minister Merkel or whatever she was. They were able to copy her fingerprints because the resolution was so high, and replicate her fingerprint and open an iPhone or something like that.
I did not see that.
No, I didn't either. That sounds like the Onion article.
No, it's legit.
No, I mean, listen, there are certainly sort of like these kind of sci-fi type situations that I'm sure you've all seen in the movies where they're able to lift it off like a keypad or something
Yeah.
like that. I don't know. I think those types of things are they're fun to think about for sure. For sure. And I'm sure that there are companies that like are thinking about it. It's just it's not our lane, quite frankly. There's probably better people to give you an interesting answer than that.
That's fair. I'll take that. Um,
Yeah.
so what are some of the common things that you see that people are doing that people everyone, right? Because not everyone is going to be an executive or a high net worth
Yeah.
individual, but privacy affects everyone. And I think we've seen recently that like gone are the days of like, oh, I'm too small to hack or to
Yeah.
target, right? So what do you see there?
Yeah, I mean, I would, the first thing I would, and again, we spoke about this earlier, but the idea of like defeatism is like probably like my biggest notion I try and fight and sort of like the broad conversation, which is, oh, my information is out there, therefore I give up, right? And there's no improvement I could possibly make. And I think that's kind of like a perfect being the enemy of good mistake. Um, and so for us, I think like acknowledging that there are relative improvements you can make that do meaningfully impact risk, I think is like the number one thing that we will fight, even as an industry, right? And I think this extends to the security community at large, that just because there exists incredible capacity that some defender or some attackers can use. And you hear this with like quantum stuff. Oh, like, how are you preparing for the post quantum future? Like, oh, well, there's all encryption will be broken and therefore like nothing is I just, again, like, I think that attitude is probably like the biggest excuse for why people don't take this stuff seriously. Um, and again, I think one of the reasons why we're so passionate about cyber as healthcare is because I think it does cut through that argument a little bit. It does mean yes, there are things that you can do today to improve relatively, and that actually can make you much better off from, call it like a longevity perspective, minimizing the likelihood you'll have that sort of catastrophic attack.
Well, ask a follow up, AJ.
I guess
You're
like
leaving us in suspense
I
here.
was Yeah, I guess like so we obviously have this podcast, for example. We both own property.
Yeah.
Like what are some of the things that you would recommend to us as people who are trying to grow our social media presence, who are public, who are military or veterans, so our data has been out there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. What would you recommend?
I mean, certainly being aware of like what is public and what is private is like a very important starting spot. And I would just make sure you're not like similar to the social security question, like you're not reliant on something that's public to protect you, right? Like, so I think an address, another great example, like we definitely find a lot of addresses for people. And if possible, like think about ways to conceal property ownership through limited liability corporations and trusts and stuff like that, that will make it more difficult for someone to find out where you live. Now, again, if it's already been exposed, I would say putting the toothpaste back in the toothpaste tube is not going to happen. So, it's important to be realistic with your effort about what's actually making a difference and what's not. From a homeowner's perspective, I also think about even things around home and home network, right? Like, I would prefer you not use the standard issued crappy hardware that's given to you by your ISP, right? Don't use the default network password that was given to you. Don't have your first and last name home in the publicly broadcasted Wi-Fi name, right? Like, I mean, stuff like that. I think is, um, again, like each individual action probably doesn't change the game, but I think they compound together for 10,000 little steps to make you much less likely to be successfully compromised.
I'll let my fiance know that because she thought it was interesting because I never put my name associated to stuff like my phone or whatever, so it's
Yeah,
always some random name. She's like, "Who's this? You know,
yeah,
whose phone was
exactly.
this?"
It can
And
come.
so
Listen, it comes with cost, right? Like I'm not.
Yeah.
It's there is certainly like a paralysis that from going too extreme, and again, I think for us, like we're very experienced with a certain type of customer and finding the right balance as far as like what they'll actually use and what they won't. And so I think like knowing, like we think about both technical capacity and capacity for friction in terms of making like a proper program and sort of They're easy things like a privacy screen on your cell phone for us is like a total no-brainer that pretty much anyone can deal with. Um, at the same time, a YubiKey is probably not, right? Like it does take a special type of, person to be okay with carrying a physical key that is going to serve as a multi-factor for like critical systems.
This is a pretty good answer.
Yeah.
I have, because we're getting close to time, I did want to
Yeah.
ask this before we run out. So you mentioned with banks, we were talking about that you could get people to change to a different tier. Could you talk more about that? I've never heard of that. So that's new to me. A different client group, I guess. Yeah, could you explain that more?
It's just that like to be like pretty succinct about it, because I think it's specific to the financial service provider. The higher tier you are within a bank, the more options they will give you. That includes security options. Phone verification to authorize a wire costs them money. Okay. Oftentimes
Mm.
you have to meet a threshold with that bank to get that service available. Even things like other types of multi-factor are not always available, and you have to ask for them. Again, I think there are like tiers of client service where they will make that stuff available for you. Um, I think for us, it usually results more in vendor change if they're open to it, right? I can't just like make you have more or something like that. But it's how do we find a financial service provider that's going to give you the protection you need? And we're not
Uh,
paid, to be clear, by any of them. Like we are just like making like cyber health first really is our governing value, and we want to make sure that again for us like trust and brand comes above everything else, and that really wants to make sure that like incentives are like really properly aligned.
It's probably like you probably have the feeling like when before I got into cybersecurity, I worked at a car rental agency, and so if you told me at the time, I could tell you which ones sucked to work with because we had to call
Yeah.
them every time they validate. So you could probably do the same. Like, yeah, this bank really sucks to work with, or this company, they're not, very helpful. So you probably get that same feeling after working with lots and lots of clients and having to work with the different institutions, I'm sure.
We have hunches, and but we tend to keep our opinions to ourselves. Again,
Fair.
from a security and a privacy perspective, we will not be shy when we think something is not great with an individual member. Like if you are using a certain product, even if it's a security product, and I think it's questionable, we'll try and migrate you off it. But if you're not willing to do it, I'd rather you do that than nothing, right?
Awesome. All right, AJ. So wrap us up. Bring us home, man.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for coming and telling us about cyber health. And I think it's a really unique perspective, right? Like before we had talked again, I had never really heard this before, but to me, it really resonates. I'm curious what my like health score would be because I don't do everything that I probably should be doing
Yeah.
knowingly. Um, but yeah, that's. I think this was a great conversation, and I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people. One of the things that I wrote down was the devil is in the defaults, and I think that
Yeah.
is often overlooked.
Yeah.
Everyone knows like don't use the default password on like your router and stuff, but I think everything else we kind of like. Oh yeah, it's fine. Like it's strong enough. They do it. Like you mentioned, Google or Apple or Microsoft or whoever you might be using, we tend to rely on their security practices because they're the vendor and they have the
Yeah.
financial capital to be able to support those initiatives, rather than taking our own, or I guess rather owning our security and our privacy ourselves and being sure that we're like falling in line there.
Yeah. Um, I think by and large, those companies employ like among the most talented people in the world, and they're excellent at their job, and they're fighting extremely challenging adversaries at incredibly large scales. So I'm certainly not here to criticize in that sense, but I do think if you talk to security professionals off the record in some of these organizations, they will tell you that they get fought by their product teams, by their business leaders, because this stuff it does cost, right? It does cost them bottom line type things, and it's a tough negotiation, right? Like the companies have to exist and have to make money. I think that those professionals do an admirable job. I would say for us, like the alignment though is we don't have that problem, right? Like I don't have a problem changing settings on a given product to be more in your security and privacy best interest. It doesn't affect my bottom line one way or the other. And so
Right.
for us, we think that very clear incentive structure is really, really important to making sure that someone is getting the best possible like care. from a cyber health perspective.
Awesome. And where can people go if they want to get coverage from your cyber health provider?
We call it joining. We view it as a membership, but yeah, cyberhealth.co. Again, we work with as little as one individual, or if you're a CISO or a corporate executive, you want us to work with your team. Book a demo and we'd love to work with folks.
Great. And where can people find you?
LinkedIn under my name, X also under my name. And we have company profiles as well, the Cyber Health Company, just about everywhere. And be sure to look at the stuff we post.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeremy.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, guys. A lot of fun.
All right, everyone. Take care. Until next time. See you around.